Good evening. Welcome to Method in Madness. This program is brought to you by Joy of Drama, and the whole intention to bring this program to you is to bring parents, teachers, and experts from the field of theatre, the arts, education together on the same platform so that we can look at the child as a human being and not anything else. Today, we're going to talk about communication and communicating with different cultures across the globe. As we are into an era of globalization and we are making friends, and especially during the COVID lockdown, we have reached out to so many friends and made new friends across the globe. But today we are going to talk about how does theatre help you and help us hone skills to culturally connect with people and communicate. To talk about that, we have with us Imogen Butler-Cole. Imogen is a British theatre maker, trainer, and activist who has worked extensively in India, Bangladesh, and the UK. Her first solo play, Foreign Body, toured India and the UK. She lived in India between 2003 and 2006, directing Much Ado About Nothing at the David Sassoon Library in Mumbai, performing the title role of Ursula at NCPA and working alongside Diksha Kolkata to create several plays about issues affecting members' lives. As an activist, Imogen works in the UK with On Road Media and Consent Collective to create a more sophisticated understanding of sexual abuse. She trains business professionals in communication skills, specializing in confidence and presence for women. She is also a graduate of the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and LESPA. Welcome, Imogen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today.
Thank you, Imogen. Let's start with your story. Just to let everybody know, Imogen and I, we are going to talk for the next 45 minutes, and then you can ask your questions. And as we speak, please join us at the comment section with your comments, and we'd love to chat with you along the way. The other thing that I have to tell about Imogen speaks flawless Bengali, and we would like to hear your story, Imogen, of the intercultural life that you have had since how many years? 20?
I'd say so, yeah, probably something like that now. I definitely refute the comment that I have flawless Bengali. I do speak Bengali, but it's not flawless by any means. And I think the way that I've always got through is by kind of inventing and speaking my own version of the language. So don't test me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say that actually my life in theatre began at a very early age, and this speaks to something that we might speak of more later. But my dad was a very enthusiastic local amateur actor, and so we would always go and watch his plays, and then both myself and my brother got involved in those plays ourselves as we were old enough to do so, and that was, still kind of primary age, so we were very young when we first started performing. And then that took me to a local youth theatre where I started to perform kind of seriously, even at an early age. And it was one of my directors at that youth theatre who began to kind of take me seriously as an actor. And he said, you could actually do this. He was like, you should try out for drama schools. So then, as you said, I went to RADA in London. For those of you who don't know, it's the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and it's the oldest and probably the best known theatre training institution in the UK. So I was there for 3 years. And again, maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but I graduated without a huge amount of confidence, and it's interesting, and we'll dig into it as we go. I think that whole idea. So the first few years of my career were quite patchy and a bit disappointing, and I'd gone with this enormous dream of this career that I wanted, and thinking that being at a school like RADA would enable that career. And I was acting in small plays, which didn't really fulfill that promise. And so after a few years of that, I managed to get myself some sponsorship to go off around the world. First of all, to kind of promote a show that I had been in with a theatre company. So they were the ones that sponsored me to go on this journey. And it also enabled me to begin to look in detail at theatre in different countries around the world. So I basically created a trip that went to all the countries where I knew people and could make contact with people in theatre. So I went off to Canada, and then from there to the United States, LA and New York, and then I went to Brazil, and then Japan, and from there Thailand, and then finally India. And India, so at that stage, I was still kind of trying to sell this show that I had been in, but also as I traveled, I became very interested in theatre in these different countries and in the different styles of theatre, and how that, to me, in a way, communicates something of the soul of a country. And again, we might talk about that later as we dive into the ideas of culture. But so I arrived in India on the end of quite a long trip. And by the time I got there, I was like, I don't want to keep traveling anymore. There's so much here to explore and discover, and for me to kind of hone my craft as a theatre maker, if you like, because there were all sorts of, I arrived in Delhi and there were lots of actors there saying, we want to work with you, let's do some work. So I did a rehearsed reading with them of a Shakespeare play. And then I traveled to Kolkata on the invitation of a friend who runs Diksha, this organization that Vaishali mentioned. And it was actually through them that I began learning Bangla, and it's been alongside them that I've continued to learn over the years. So that is an organization that is based in, first of all, Kalighat, and then some other red light districts throughout the city. And they work with children who've grown up in those red light areas to use theatre to explore the issues that affect their lives. And this, to me, was a total step change. This was really influential to me in my journey, because it felt like this was the most useful use of theatre I'd ever seen. Here were children making plays about child sexual abuse and trafficking and HIV/AIDS and child rights and early marriage. And they were little kids from the age of 8 up to 18, 20. And they created all of this work themselves. And I turned up with my RADA training thinking that I had something to show them. And I actually came away from there feeling like I knew very little, and that I could learn so much from them. And from there, I traveled to Mumbai, and then I started acting with Rehan Engineer and what was then the company theatre. No, that's not true. Industrial theatre. And then I directed this Much Ado About Nothing with the company theatre. So I had an opportunity to use theatre in all sorts of different contexts, and that was very exciting to me. However, what I discovered by the end of my time there, when I had directed this production of Much Ado, which was beautiful and super exciting, and so we used, it was gorgeous because we adapted the original Shakespearean language, because in Shakespeare there are kind of levels of language, right? There's the very poetic, heightened language, and then there's the kind of standard Shakespearean verse, and then there's also kind of some very rough, the prose stuff that in Much Ado About Nothing is used by the Watchmen and the Dogberry and Verges, those people. So what we did was we adapted the high poetic Shakespeare into Urdu, and the low kind of everyday into like street Hindi, and then the rest of it remained the original Shakespeare. So this was super exciting, and we had a great show, and we had a wonderful time. But what I realized after making that was I wasn't really trained as a director. I didn't really have the skills necessary to create theatre. And also it's something that I learned from that time with Diksha as well, because what we did was I after being in Mumbai for some time, some friends of mine were creating a festival in Mumbai around violence, public and private. So I went back to Kolkata. I worked with Diksha again for a while to develop a play around trafficking. That was the subject that they decided that they would like to explore. And so we took that show to Mumbai to this festival. Now, the kids in Diksha mostly speak Bangla. Some of them speak Hindi because some of them, there's a lot of trafficking, obviously, in the area. Some of them have come from Bangladesh, but some have come from Bihar. So there's some Hindi-speaking kids. So those Hindi-speaking kids had to teach the rest of the group how to speak all this in Hindi, this play that they created, in order to present it at this festival. And then at the end of the festival, some of the other performers asked the Diksha group, why theatre? Why would you make theatre? And one of the senior members of the group took the microphone very strongly and she said, because everybody in the world should know our story. And that kind of gave me this sense of responsibility now that if they were indeed to make theatre that could be enjoyed by anybody in the world, then I had a responsibility to go and learn how to make that theatre myself. So I returned to the UK and I went to LISPA, which Vaishali also mentioned, which was at that point the London International School of Performing Art.
Oh, nice.
And it was based on, it was based on the Lecoq method. So it's physical theatre and devising and clowning and mask and all these extremely physical forms of theatre. So I did my training there for 2 years. And for me, the reason behind going there was because I wanted to know, having been in all of these countries around the world, I wanted to learn how to make theatre that the spoken language wasn't necessarily the most important means of communication, that the visual, the physical language could tell that story as well. So when I finished there, that's when I started my career in making theatre and creating shows. And I made a play in English and Portuguese about the martial art of capoeira. And I made, then I got a job in Bangladesh and I went there and I started making some plays there, a play called Pinik, which was about drug use on the streets in Dhaka. And then I came back to London and I made another Bangla and English play called Dreamtime or Shopno Shomoy, which was about a children's play with puppetry to learn and teach both English and Bangla to small children. And I began this career of like making really international theatre where the physicality was at the heart of it. And then I made that. So the last show that I've made, and probably the most successful one that I've made so far, was a play called Foreign Body. And this was a play that talked about my journey of healing from sexual violence. So I'm a survivor of sexual violence, and I made a play about the impacts of sexual violence on me and also 8 other survivors that I interviewed for that play. But it was only me that performed. So I was on stage, I didn't speak, but my voice and these voices of the 8 other women were there in voiceover, in a soundtrack. So it was a physical response to those stories that I was hearing. And I toured that show around the UK and also around India. And we came and we performed in Mumbai and in at Adi Shakti in Pondicherry and in Allahabad and all sorts of cities around. Where else we went to Guwahati. So it was a real pleasure to be back, and to be sharing my work there again. And then the following year, which was now up to just after a year ago, I came back to Kolkata and I made another play there in Bangla and English again, which was based on the same methodology and the same subject matter. So I was interviewing local survivors, and then with local dancers and performers, we created a movement piece to go alongside that soundtrack. And then the pandemic hit. And so since that point, I've been in London, and in fact now I'm living in Bristol, which is in the southwest of England. And since the pandemic, I have not been one of those theatre makers who is immediately adapting to create digital online work, because it feels to me like it doesn't really meld with the kind of theatre that I like to make. So instead, I've been making a podcast about whiteness and racism called Loving Colour. And I've also been beginning a memoir. So I'm going to be writing a book, again, like Foreign Body, about my experiences of healing after sexual violence, which kind of draws on the body of work that was Foreign Body, and Shashi Toshori, which is the play that we made in Kolkata. So that's that brings me up to where we are today. And yeah, like I know I will come back to theatre as time allows, but for the meantime, I'm actually really enjoying coming inside and creating audio worlds and written worlds, and taking some time away actually from the sense within theatre. Obviously, what I've really discovered actually through the pandemic is that in theatre, as a theatre maker, which is how I kind of self-define, we have to be responsible for all these different elements. So we write the play, but then we cast the play, and then we direct the play, and maybe we perform in the play, and then we have to light the play and design the play and costume the play and sell the play and, promote the show, and then take it around the country and, carry these sets. And it's a very, very wearing process. And actually, I'm quite enjoying the process of making a podcast. I can sit in my living room and record some text and put it up on the internet. And, even if I want people to come and see it, I don't have to scramble to get people in a room on this one particular date. It's out there now. People can listen in their own time. And then, I'm writing a book, which again is a huge amount of work, but it's literally just typing. Like, it feels very light in comparison. So I'm actually quite loving taking a little bit of time away at the moment and discovering other things as well.
That's pretty extraordinary, Imogen. That life is something you can keep going back to pick and choose anecdotes and experiences to move ahead.
Yeah.
You have also been training communication skills.
That's true. I left that part out of my story.
You left that part. And good you left that, because I feel theatre it's this mother, umbrella under which all these little facets come in.
Yeah.
But what do you think? How has theatre helped you to become a communications trainer? And what is it about communications that theatre really talks about?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, I love that definition that theatre is like the mother umbrella that everything comes from. And that's really true. And I think sometimes, because my career has been so eclectic, it's difficult sometimes to kind of find that defining factor. But what I've come to really is that it's all about telling stories, and as you say, so it's all about communication. So my career in communication skills training came from RADA as well, actually. So RADA has this subsidiary arm called RADA Business. And RADA Business takes the kinds of tools and techniques that we learn through theatre and applies them to a business context. So if you think about it, in theatre, we are really expert communicators. That's what we have to get really good at. So whether that be communicating with my fellow actor on the stage, or whether that be communicating with an audience in front of me. So it's all about using our body language, our voices, and fundamentally the thing that connects the two, the breath, in order to manage my state and settle my, people very often get nervous if they're addressing a large group of people. So how can I manage my state through my use of breath and through my physicality in order to become more measured, in order to be able to speak with more credibility? So it's really about, applying all of those tools and techniques to communication. And I think one of the things that I often like to make clear for people at the beginning of a course, if I'm training, is that it's not about becoming someone else. Because of course, acting very often it's like I have to morph into somebody else. But there's a lovely quote from Judi Dench, which I won't quote directly, but roughly she says that acting is not like putting on a coat and becoming someone else. It's actually about peeling off the layers to become the essence of myself as a person, which is the essence of that character. And I think that's really important, both in acting and in general in communication. So how do we use our voices? How do we use our body language? And yeah, as you said in the beginning, my speciality has become actually confidence, and specifically for women in the workplace, because, you know, historically, we're still relatively new in the workplace and we still have a long way to go to achieve parity. In representation in the workplace, and obviously in pay in the workplace. And therefore, I think all of that has a knock-on effect to the amount of space that we feel able to take up as women in the workplace. So it's about that as well. Like, how do I stop myself from shrinking and becoming apologetic and not really knowing how to connect with people? And how do I grow into that space and really connect with you, whether that be through eye contact in the real world or with a camera, as we might be doing in this context. And then again, there's also just the storytelling element. Like, if we're making a presentation in business, we have to be able to craft great stories. And that's actually one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, is a storytelling workshop for a big global company, a huge company. And it's with, you know, senior managers and directors and CEOs and stuff. But they also need to know how to tell stories in order to influence the people that they are communicating with, whether that be their teams or their clients. So all of this stuff is really vital throughout the world in business, not just in the theatre sector. Yeah.
Imogen, you've worked with children extensively as well throughout your years in UK as well as in Bangladesh and Kolkata and India. What do you see in children that they need to work on? Because I feel somehow all children, they somehow get into this trap of being judged and judge others quite early. If somebody just tells a girl that you're very shy, you know, or my daughter is very shy, the child seems to kind of take it in like a sponge and reflect it everywhere that she goes. How important are words? And when we are talking about communicating, and how important are words? And is this a problem that you see across the globe? I mean, is judging or getting judged or judging your own self a problem that children go throughout, across the globe?
Oh, gosh, I mean, I'm by no means an expert. I'm not yet a parent myself, although I hope to be. So I don't have so much experience. And as you say, yes, I have worked with young people, particularly that organization Diksha. I've done various workshops for young people here in the UK, although not for a long time, actually. I've kind of moved more into this sector of working with adults and professionals. What I would say about two things that you said there. One about judgment, which I'll talk about personally, because I have a big problem with that myself, I'm ashamed to admit. And the second thing about language and the way that we speak to our young people. And there's something that, and this is something that I've taken from parenting experts or other parents that I know. And that is to avoid the language of labeling. Like you've just said, she's a shy child, you're very shy. Because that, children take, particularly from parents or teachers, anybody in authority, children take what we tell them as law, as truth. So if also like with rude or aggressive, like if I tell my child you're rude, they wear that as a label on themselves, rather than separating the individual from the behavior. And I think a more useful way of saying it is, if the child does something which we think of as rude, we say that is rude. That language is rude. And then the child knows, like, oh, that's the behavior. I can separate myself from that behavior. So if you have a child that you think she's shy, you might say, when you step back like that, that's shy behavior. So you're talking about the behavior rather than the person. So then that doesn't become like a fundamental belief that this child then has to, work through years of therapy in order to change. So that's one element of it. The element of judgment, I think, is very interesting as well, because as I say, it's something which I really have to fight with, and I'm not sure where it comes from. I think there is an element of it that comes from my upbringing, but that, yes, I tend to pass quick judgments on people. And the interesting thing about that I've learned is I think we judge other people in the way that we judge ourselves. So if I'm walking down the street and I see someone walk past me and I think, oh, that person is, insert judgment here, then that's just a mirror of the fact that I am inwardly judging myself. And I can be very, very harsh to myself as a judge. My inner critic is extremely vocal and quite destructive. And that's something I've had to work on as well. So I have to address that voice when I hear it. You're lazy. You're not good enough. You are, you're not enough, even simply. You're never going to make it. You're not this, you're not that. I have those inner voices all the time. And what I've learned is if I am attentive to those voices, if I listen to that thing which says you're not good enough, then I catch it and I go, now where does that voice come from? Because very often it's not my own. It might be a teacher, it might be a parent, it might be a sibling, it might be someone that we looked up to. So then I begin to recognize that voice as separate to myself, like I was just saying about the behavior as we're speaking to a child. I recognize that as separate to myself, and then I'm able to step back from it. And so in a similar way, if as we're bringing up our children around, theatre and drama, instead of using those labels, if we are able to refer to the specific behavior, then that's not going to sit on them as a judgment going further into life. Like I have, I am currently writing my book, making a podcast, moving house, doing all this training work and trying to set up a training company. Like I have huge amounts of pressure, which I put on myself. And still I tell myself I'm lazy. That comes from somewhere. That's not a fact, that's not real. People around me have often said that I'm one of the hardest working people they know. So that's that voice that keeps telling me I'm lazy. It's not true. So if I can identify where it comes from, that one I think is actually parental, then I can give it back to them and go, well, that's your perception. And then I don't have to identify myself with that. And then I'm freer to continue with the work that I want to do.
Did theatre help you identify that?
I think that specific thing is actually more from kind of therapeutic work that I've done. But for me, it's interesting because the theatre and therapy kind of were a real parallel. When I began to make Foreign Body, the play about my experiences of healing from sexual violence, the awareness of that abuse only came up through being in therapy. And then when I started to make the play, I realized in order to be safe on stage and in order to create a safe space for the audience, first and foremost, I need to be well. So I can't be doing this as, it's not theatre as therapy. I can't be bringing my pain to the stage in order to process it, because that's not safe for me and it's not safe for anybody in the audience.
Anybody else, yeah.
So I had to be doing the work, the therapeutic work off stage in order to make myself safe while I'm on stage. So theatre and therapy were parallel paths. They weren't the same path. But I would say, to your question, that theatre is one of those things that can really help us to get to know ourselves. Because the more we delve into our emotional worlds, the more we have to find ourselves able to replicate that on stage. The more we are exploring, now this sounds very pretentious, but we're exploring the human condition, right? What is it to be human? Unless I know what it is to be human, unless I know what kind of a human I am myself, then I'm not very well going to be able to portray other human beings. So I think in a way it does necessitate a self-awareness, and that's where I think those two things collide.
The peeling off of the skin, of the different layers. Maybe that's something that go on.
Well, I was going to say that reminds me of, there was a quote, which I'm not going to be able to quote either actually directly, but that I put in the program for Foreign Body, which was about peeling off the skin and exposing flesh and bone. That's what we have to do instead of like armoring ourselves. And I guess it's similar to that Judi Dench thing. I'm not putting something over me. I'm actually stripping away to be able to reveal the essence of what's inside. And that's when I think things get really powerful. Yeah.
So you've worked across the globe. What is it that's inside really? Is it the same or is it different for people across?
Yeah, this is it's also really interesting. And as I said when I was talking about, I traveled around the world and I saw theatre in all of those different countries and more as well, which I left off my list, I think. But to me, theatre and culture in general can really be the expression of a soul of a nation. As I said, like I think one of the things that I realized when I was traveling, was that the theatre in the UK traditionally, so we have this distinction between theatre, where we stand around either talking, Shakespeare or the kind of kitchen sink dramas that we used to have in the kind of 60s and 70s. But traditionally, theatre here tends to be striding around, addressing someone, talking to people. And then there's physical theatre, which is this whole different idea, like using your bodies to tell stories. And the reason I mention this is because while I was in Brazil, I remember saying to somebody, I'm interested in physical theatre, like I want to learn about physical theatre. And they looked at me and they said, what's physical theatre? Because like, what's not physical theatre? And that's when I began to understand that in the UK, like we have this theatre which is inherently not particularly expressive through the body. And then, there's the French physical theatre tradition, which actually I think comes from, further from like the Polish theatre tradition, and those, the poor theatre, the use of the body, like really putting yourself, your body through the paces of all different forms of expression. Where, I trained at RADA, and it was in many ways, it was a brilliant training. Like the voice work was unparalleled. We had all this brilliant Alexander technique, which is about kind of finding space in the body. But we weren't fit. We did a bit of period dance, from like Elizabethan era, which is just gently shuffling around because you had to wear these corsets. So you can't do much hard work. There was stage fighting, so sword fighting and things like that. And physical, the stage fighting, physical combat was probably the most hard work physically. But really, you didn't use your body very much. And I think then I went to do this physical theatre training for 2 years, and it was a proper workout every single day, and it's very different. So yes, I think there is something very specific about each nation that is expressed through their kind of theatre that they use. So on that journey, for example, I went to Canada, and there was lots of outdoor Shakespeare in the garden, like very kind of, similar in a way to our British theatre traditions. And then I went to New York, and I saw hip hop theatre off Broadway, and then social theatre in Hell's Kitchen, which is one of the most deprived parts of New York. And then I went to New Zealand, and I saw this amazing, again, there was a Shakespeare production actually, but which was using like I don't know if people know about the Maori dance forms, the haka, which they use in front
New Zealand.
And they use in the beginning of the rugby matches or at people's funerals, and there's a lot of it you can see online. But that kind of intense physical, like the confrontation of it, the the kind of like it's attempting to express one's dominance and like that extraordinary physical transformation that they do for that. It's also like channeling the ancestors, like it's a really kind of primal form. And then in Japan, the No theatre, which is, and interestingly, I think to me was like moving more towards those kinds of classical Indian traditions where there's a very specific language of gesture, language of body movement, the eyes, the faces, the makeup, the extraordinary costumes and all of that. So like it's kind of what's the word? Like there's almost, I don't want to say rigidity, but like that
a code that they follow.
Yeah.
It's codified.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's also extremely rigorous, you know, the discipline of it, the years and years of training of it. And then what was interesting to me in India was seeing that kind of like the dance theatre, which has all those, the kind of rigorous, as you say, codified nature, which has to be learned and learned and learned and learned and learned. And then the kind of Western style theatre of like spoken theatre, which in comparison just seemed quite loose and floppy and much less disciplined. So then, however, then I would, you know, that was in some of the kind of amateur theatre, but then I'd see these extraordinary, like I remember, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to, off the top of my head, remember her name, but it might come back to me as we speak. But there was an incredible performance by one of the old kind of grand dames of Delhi theatre, a woman director who directed a production called Indira and Her Grandmother. I don't know if you are aware of it. It was years back. It was like in the probably early 2000s, before your time.
Oh yeah. not really. Yeah, before I came to Delhi. Yeah.
Yes. So so where those two worlds met, like that, there was an incredible kind of imagination to it, and then the kind of rigidity of form as well. So, and in Brazil, so I went along, and a bit like I did when I got to Diksha, I was like, I'm going to do a workshop because I can show you how it's done, like to my shame now. But in Brazil, they have this extraordinary tradition of object theatre. So they'll take up anything, and this becomes a missile, and then it becomes, you know, it can be a character in itself, and they just adapt what they find. And I think you offer, again, it's another form of like the poor theatre, right? You find in cultures where they might not have, you know, you go to the RSC in London and they spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on their costumes and their sets and their lighting, and it looks beautiful, but where's the soul? And there you go to the street theatre in Brazil and they've got nothing, but they've got everything because they just transform what they have into something beautiful. So I think, it's born of necessity, and it's born of history, and it's born of the mode of expression of a culture. So
we have Nukkad Natak in Delhi, the street theatre.
Yeah.
You know, it's in many parts of the country, actually, street theatre.
Yeah, exactly. I've been extremely privileged and very fortunate to be able to travel and experience those multifarious forms in so many different places that can inspire me in the kind of theatre that I make. And as I said, kind of be motivated to create work that is expressive in other ways than simply through the language. Or rather, the spoken language.
Spoken language, yes. There are many parents and teachers who are watching us, Imogen, today. And you and I, we have been doing theatre. You've been doing theatre, many more years before than I started doing theatre. But whenever we did start, we did see that it gave us an opening, a realization of something which is true, which is closer to truth, of our own lives and of people's lives. But when we talk about people across the globe or from different cultures, how do you see them through the lens of a communications person? Now that we know you see them like this, through theatre, but as a communications person, how different or similar are we all across the globe?
Yeah, this I think is such an interesting point, and one that I've actually grappled with a lot, because now, also, like, again, in that story about the way that I came to Diksha with my RADA training, thinking that I had a lot to teach these people. I think because of my upbringing and my training, and the fact that I come from the UK, especially with communication, the way that we speak, it's a challenge to divorce oneself from that colonial mindset where we quite naturally, I think, and I say naturally meaning like habitually, that we maybe tend to feel like we do it the right way and that we have the right to try and show other people from other cultures and other countries how it should be done. And obviously, this is a very important part of the, UK-India history. And I think when I first came to India in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, I hadn't done my learning around that, and I wasn't so aware of colonial history and all of what it implies in terms of being a white person from the UK coming to India. And I think in those days I was quite entitled, and I felt like I had the right to, and I came to the British Council and I did Shakespeare workshops in schools and colleges and at universities, and I was teaching teachers as well, like you do. But I was probably in those years, not probably, in those years, I was not aware of the political implications of that and my stance at that time. And what I try and do now in my communications is that I'm not, well, and it's interesting because I came when I came and toured Foreign Body, my play in India a few years ago, I also got some work doing communications training. And I was, by that point in my life, super aware of the, colonial history and the implications of that. And so I made much more of an effort to, what I can share is a suggestion. And I'm not going to try and alter the way that you speak. I'm just going to give you the tools that I have at my fingertips to see what is useful for you, which of the tools that you might choose to take out of that toolkit as you go forward in your journey. So, yes, we all have our own means of communicating. And obviously we have our means of communicating because, this is also a fascinating thing. Not only do I speak Bangla, but I've learned Thai and German and French and Portuguese. And so I know a few different languages. And I have always been amazed at the essence of a language and what it can tell us about a people. So, for example, in Thai, when you greet somebody, instead of saying, "How are you?" like we do in English, and we're not really even interested in the answer, we just say, "How are you?" Yes, fine, good. And we can, what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. In Thai, when you greet someone, you say, "Have you eaten?" Because food is so important that you have to make sure if they've eaten, if they haven't eaten, you're going to give them some food, and then we can start to communicate. And they also, every emotion relates to the heart. So if someone is angry, they're hot-hearted. Otherwise, you're cool-hearted. So it all relates back to there. And it's like that beautiful kind of bringing it back to the body, bringing the emotion back to the body. So we can learn a lot about a language. So for me as a communications teacher, I mostly only teach this stuff in English. I've actually been given a job in Portuguese later this year, and I'm still grappling with whether or not I'm going to be able to carry that out effectively in a different language. But if I'm teaching you communication, not that I would need to, but anyone in India, I come in with a certain ignorance around your culture and around what is appropriate and around, what body, because body language is so important in India, right? The way we use gesture, the way we use our hands and our heads, and the kind of intonation is so important as well. And for an example, in communications training that I bring from RADA and from my academy training, because, also I'm popping off in so many different thought directions at the moment, but I'll bring them back together, I promise. So the academy training is very much grounded in a kind of upper middle class space. And now RADA is actually much better. And one of the things that RADA Business does is we provide funding to the academy so that they can offer bursaries and people can come for free. So it's not as class stratified as it used to be. And they give a lot of bursaries. I think it's even more than 50% of students now are not paying for their education there. So historically, however, it's still very much rooted in that kind of middle class, upper middle class background. So for the first year, so there are dialect courses, like accent courses throughout the training. For the first 1 year, it's learning received pronunciation, which is roughly like my accent. And for the second year, you learn, dozens of other accents. So still received pronunciation, the kind of middle class accent, is the main form that they teach there. And so that's a class thing. And so coming back to the way that I teach in my communications training now, and that I imagine, like, if I'm teaching in an Indian context, it's a whole different thing, where we talk about upward inflection. So if I end a question by going up, then it sounds like I'm asking a question. Sorry, if I end a sentence by going up, it sounds less certain. And what we often train people to do is to come down at the end of a sentence. So it sounds like you're making a statement. It sounds like you're surer of yourself. Now, if I come to India and I'm then teaching this, it's a whole different thing, because intonation is just different.
It is.
The fact that and actually recently on a RADA business chat, one of the other tutors had listened to an Indian person talking about something and was saying, well, they use the upward inflection a lot and therefore they must have been really unsure. And I was like, no, this is dialect. So you can't be prescriptive across the board, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, if I'm teaching training in another cultural context, I have to be very careful not to slip into that colonial mindset, which says, we know how it's done, we do it best, and you've got to learn how to do it like us, because that is still rife across the planet enough as it is. So we have to learn to be very careful and just, if not careful, that sounds kind of also like, I don't know, it's not quite careful, but sensitive, and
sensitive.
And actually to educate ourselves around a culture, a language, an expression before we attempt to clomp in and say, this is how we do it, this is how it should be done.
We are 15 minutes. We have 15 minutes more to go. I would request our audience to kindly ask your questions if you have any. But I do have a question for Imogen. In India, I don't know, it could be in other countries also. When we were growing up, we used to have these travelogues that we would read and learn about different countries across the world. Does theatre and doing theatre from different cultures, different periods, help you to understand the people over there? If I engage in a production of a play written by, say, Ibsen, do I get to know Norwegian culture? And does that help me as a young person? I'm not that young, but suppose I'm doing theatre. I've started learning theatre and I'm engaged with a theatre group and I'm working on a play written by Ibsen. It does take me to a Norwegian culture. But if we keep doing this, keep playing roles in different plays written by different playwrights across the globe, does it bring us closer to the people over there?
I would say To an extent, I would imagine, yes. But I also think it depends on either the way it's taught or the mindset that we have when we are engaging with that theatre. So you use Ibsen as an example, and it makes me also think of Chekhov, because to me as a young person they were kind of interchangeable, although of course Norwegian and Russian culture are very, very different. But so I remember feeling the intense feeling of kind of spaciousness and yet constriction of Chekhov plays. And I remember feeling a sense of, like this, and I think maybe what unites them is, even from the UK, they feel like they're from the cold north, and there's a real sense of like wrapping up warm and like having to struggle against the elements. And maybe that communicates something about the psychology of people in that kind of extreme global north,
geographical.
However, I think it really does depend on the way in which we open our mind to those kinds of plays. What can we like when I was studying those plays in my A level, for example, it was much more about, we're studying theatre for theatre's sake and like learning about the characters and their motivations. And again, I go back to Chekhov because of the Stanislavski method. And that was, we were kind of studying them in relation to the method. So it's about the motivations of the characters and what do they want and what their obstacles are and what do they need to do to overcome their obstacles. And I don't know if there was a real kind of curiosity toward what does it teach us about Russia in this time period? What does Ibsen teach us about Norway in this time period? And maybe again, that is something of the colonial mindset, where it's like we maybe don't approach something with that curiosity, which actually can bring us such richness and learning. And that we could, I think, as white British people, learn a lot more if we had our blinkers open a little bit more to what we can learn. We still have a habit in this country of saying Shakespeare's the greatest playwright in the world that ever lived. But how do we know? Like, the people that make these kinds of pronouncements have not read, or seen Ratantiyam. They haven't got to know the extraordinary playwrights in the rest of the world in their own language. You can't make those kinds of pronouncements unless you know. So I think with an openness and with a willingness to learn, absolutely, we can learn a lot about a culture through their performance and through their playwriting. And, as I was saying earlier, particularly, I think through the performance forms, like how is the body used? How is the stage used? Do we interact with the audience? Like, historically in the UK, there was, in Shakespeare's times, there was always a little bit of interaction because you had the yard in the Globe and it was daylight, and so you could see everybody's faces. But now we tend to have spotlights and the fourth wall and little interaction with the audience for like centuries there in the middle. And then now, only recently in the last, maybe 10 or 15 years, has this kind of interactive and location specific theatre become fashionable. And so now there's like as we move around, we use spaces differently. So that maybe says something about the culture today, that we are becoming more open again. We're able to interact with people, like the immersive theatre of today, where you're supposed to kind of feel like you are a part of that world, which was, I think, what I was approaching with that Midsummer Night's Dream. Much Ado About Nothing at the library in Mumbai when I did that in 2006, I think it was, because we used the whole of the library. The audience came in through the main doors. It's in Kalaghora. I don't know if people are aware of it. It's opposite from the Jahangirnagar
art gallery.
So you go in through the main door on Galagora. So it's a busy, busy street, and you come inside, and it's this old wood paneled, tiled floor with this long staircase coming down. And so the audience come in, they're all in this passageway. And then the actors start to come down the staircase, and they're talking about men coming back from the war. And then the doors swing open, and all these people come striding all the way through the middle of the audience. And so the audience become a part of that play. And then there's a party to welcome the men back from the war, and they move through the library out into the gardens. And so you pour out into the gardens, and there are people there on stilts, and the fire breathing, and there's a big party, and you're all handed masks and snacks, and you mingle about in the courtyard. And then the play begins to, carries on around you. And then as the audience seated, the backdrop of the library became like the backdrop for the play. So that was a kind of step into that immersive world. And I think, that was a way of exploring form and cutting down some of the barriers that I felt I had grown up with in terms of theatre, which was, the training that we had at RADA was all very like fourth wall. We're on stage, you're the audience. I kind of
proscenium.
Yeah. Like I kind of have to do tricks in my mind, which makes me forget that you're there as an audience. And I, with the method acting, like I have to try and become that character and forget there's an audience there. That never worked for me. And that's another thing where I have that, I was talking about the inner voice and the inner judgment earlier, if you're not good enough, because I was on stage and I always was very aware of the fact I was on stage, and here was my co-actor. And, I'm not Anya in the Cherry Orchard. I'm actually Imogen, and I'm acting as Anya. That was very important to me. And I think that's where the physical tradition became more accessible for me, because that teaches me that I transform my body. And by doing that, I feel the emotion. I don't have to try and make myself believe I'm this person and try and make myself feel this person intellectually and then see what happens in my body. No, I make my body do the thing, and then that makes me feel a certain way, and then I'm into the truth of it. That's just the way it works for me. It'll be different for different people. Yeah, but we all have to find what works for us as performers or directors. But that was a very long-winded and not particularly precise answer to your question. Yes, we can learn about culture through theatre, I think.
We'll just take one question. I think Mitali has asked this, and this is a very interesting question. I don't know whether it is in context, but yes, it seems like in context. Does acting come out automatically out of emotion, or the acting has to be taught? There are situations and scripts where it matches with yourself. Do you think it is an advantage? So it's an interesting question. Do you get to know about yourself more when you're acting, or you connect with yourself more when you're acting? Or
this is
can this be taught?
It's a really interesting question. I think it goes back to what I was just saying just now, actually, where it depends on the individual, what works for you. Like I'm saying, the kind of method acting intellectual thing never really worked for me, but the physical transformation really works for me. So it depends. I think it really depends on the individual. And I think, therefore, as actors, we need to adapt as much as we can to, try out different forms and see what works. So, and I think it's also a combination. Does the acting come out of the emotion, or does the acting have to be taught? And I think for me, I said early on that I came out of RADA and I was actually lacking in confidence. And I think what happened at RADA was there are all these different kind of forms that are thrown at you. And I felt like I had to do like the method acting plus the Laban, which is actually a physical method, which I think can work very well. But then I'm trying to do that on top of the method acting and on top of my voice work and on top of this and on top, there's just too much going on. And I think that, there are some amazing actors, brilliant actors out there who have never been to drama school, but find their way instinctively and impulsively. And I think with brilliant directors, surely actors can become great without having the training, but you still need to practice, and it takes the guidance of brilliant directors to bring out, I think a lot of it is about confidence, to bring out the confidence in a young actor, to know that they are, they're able to just release themselves into the joy of presenting someone on stage. And I had directors at RADA who were just really down on me, and it took away my confidence. And I think it really does depend on who you get to work with.
Work with, yes. And your team. And when you're joining when you're in a theater group, that is also a big thing. What kind of people are you working with? What kind of support do you have from the theater group and your director? Makes a huge difference. But to wrap everything up, do you think starting young, into drama and expressing your own self first helps you become a better communicator for the rest of your life? Does that help?
Yes, I think so. And for me, as I said, my dad was in amateur theatre. We always had, he was always clowning around, fooling around. And that was very liberating for us. And it was very playful. And then, so it was a natural thing for us to go and join in those local amateur productions. And so I felt comfortable. I felt at home on stage, so that by the time I got into youth theatre, it was this extremely exciting place for me to be on stage around the theatre, like that amazing hush when the lights go down. Like there's something really magical about that. And definitely, if you are around that space a lot as a young person, then it becomes more natural to you. You have less kind of fear or discomfort or insecurity about being there if that's where you want to be. And I think that, there's a natural confidence. Studies over and over again show children when they're enabled to express and play through theatre, they become more confident, they become more expressive, they have more joy, and therefore they're, much better able to learn in any subjects. And then, yes, if we have this grounding in how to use our voices and our bodies, even if we don't go on to pursue a career in the theatre, as I'm saying, with the kind of training work I do, if we have this background, then we're able to communicate more effectively no matter what professional life we end up in, and also with our peers, with our relationships. Like, emotional literacy is really important, and I don't think I would have the emotional literacy that I have if it were not for my grounding in theatre.
Thank you so much, Imogen, for those lovely words. And this was an amazing conversation. And I hope that whoever was watching us, our viewers, have taken the best out of this conversation. I hope it supports you and empowers you as a teacher, as a parent. And I think there's no age to start doing theatre. And for me, theatre has always been a therapy. It's been a therapeutic tool for me. And I feel that all of us should explore theatre at least once in our lives. Thank you so much, Imogen. Repeat to everybody. And please subscribe to our channel. We do these conversations every week. And we bring in experts from different fields to talk about different things and interesting things about arts and education. Thank you, Imogen, and good evening, I think, for you. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.